remember that time that I said Florida State was a no-brainer to the Big Ten?
Based on the analysis we're looking at, based on these 5 points, Florida State is a no-brainer brand-wise for the Big Ten.
It turns out it's much more complicated than I thought. The Seminoles want the Big Ten, and the Big Ten might just want the Seminoles. But there are 3 massive hurdles in the way: the ACC grant of rights, exit fees, research spending and academic fit alignment, and also the travel logistics. It could be rough. If you're a Seminole fan, though, you need to understand the reality of the situation. But don't worry, this isn't a eulogy for the dream. Let's break down these challenges. I'm your professor, the Wild Ute, and I've got my 2 partners in crime here, Nathan Bomber Brown and Moan. What's up, guys?
Not much, Professor.
Thanks for having us in.
Yeah, we rolled out of bed today and decided to attend class.
That's right.
That's absolutely. Hey, we've got a great one on the docket today, too, guys. A really important one. And first thing we need to start out with, too, when we're talking about Florida State, is our history. Nate, you and I did a video last year, and we came out with a clear hypothesis here in conclusion that Florida State was a good fit for the Big Ten. And if you want to check out that video, y'all, I'd recommend you all check it out and everything. That's going to be in the comments section of this video right now. But the end analysis, the final overall results are what you see on your screen right here. Florida State, based on the model, the matrix model put together last year, actually showed out in 5th position, tied with Oregon, so above the average, above median, and they look like a strong candidate. What do you guys think about that?
Moen?
Listen, I think based off of last year's model, but I think we've learned from mistakes that maybe we weren't including very important things in that model, some intangibles that we weren't aware of at the time.
And from my point, both Florida State and Clemson, I still think they're in the driver's seat. The lawsuits haven't been dropped, but we definitely need to recognize that ESPN decided to pick up that balance of that contract, even though the conference is in flux. And I just think that we thought from a common sense standpoint that wasn't going to happen. And now we've made it past. The option was picked up, and now we have to look at next steps. So what we thought everybody valued going in to realignment this last year, I think has been maybe pushed to the side a little bit.
100%. And that really parlays into the next discussion topic, too. This was last year based on the model. Let's look at what's going on right now. What are the 3 biggest roadblocks, hurdles for the Florida State Seminoles to get into the ACC? And number 1, staring you right in the face, Nate, you just mentioned it, based on the extension of the ESPN ACC media agreement, we've got the grant of rights. That's going to be going until 2036. And guys, so if we actually estimate what Florida State was assuming to be exit fees last year and take a discount, a 1-year discount of those exit fees going into right now, as of today, Florida State would have to pay roughly $528 million freaking dollars in exit fees. Moan, can they do that?
No, they can't, unless they do a bond issue or something to an extreme level. They can't afford as a university to pony that all up in one go right now.
What do you think about this, Nate?
I think the money itself is it's tangible. It definitely is a barrier to entry for them leaving the ACC and going somewhere else. But at the end of the day, you just said it. Every year it ticks off, it goes down, and as time flies, maybe in 5-6 years, 20, 30, 31. That's now down to roughly $275 million. I think that's more affordable. It all comes down to what do they value most? Is it money or is it perception? And in my opinion, I still think it's perception. Florida State wants to be perceived to be at the big boy table, and that would be the Power 2 conferences.
I 100% agree with that. 528 is a lot of money, $528 million, guys. And really, hey, if the ESPN doesn't pick up the extension of the ACC contract, this number could look a lot different. Right. That's what Florida State was hoping for. It didn't happen. And so now they're staring at this number in the face, or around this number in the face, Number one obstacle for the Big Ten entry for the Noles is this number right here in the ACC grant of rights and paying a wad of money to get out of the conference. So let's talk about the second huge hurdle, guys. This is a big one that wasn't often discussed. It wasn't considered in last year's model and analysis in Florida State. But the more we've learned about relationships, philosophy for education, research spending, AAU status, the more we realize that Florida State is kind of an outlier with a lot of other Big Ten institutions. Moan, can you speak to this at all?
Yeah, most of the Big Ten institutions, you've got it listed there, are AAU. Previously, Kevin Warren and Tony Petiti, I think, has backed it up, have said that AAU is not a requirement. But there's a lot of relationships and partnerships that go into AAU status, especially in the Big Ten. You know, we've got the Cancer Research Consortium, we've got the Academic Alliance. So there's a lot of relationship building that's going on in the Big Ten from its inception to currently. I mean, including new members like Nebraska, Maryland, Rutgers, Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA. So I think that familiarity needs to be established. I mean, the Seminoles have been outside the Big Ten sphere of influence, as it were. They've been more in the SEC sphere of influence, so we don't have a relationship really developed with them. So I think that's important. A good research relationship, and they can start doing that today.
And as Moan mentioned, Nebraska is the only school in the Big Ten that's not in the AAU. Most of the schools in the Big Ten are. So Florida State, in theory, and Nebraska would be the two outside looking in at the moment if they indeed were in the Big Ten. Any last thoughts on this, Nate?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I still don't think the school would have to be AAU to be invited. I do think those relationships matter, and AAU maybe is one of the markers for that. But at the end of the day, Florida State is a fantastic football brand. They play athletics through the roof. And if they show good effort, and there have been reports that one of the reasons that it didn't happen this last year is because they needed to build up the research part of their university that Florida State's taken to heart, and they're starting to do that. They're starting to make investments in infrastructure and going that way. So in 5-6 years, is there a chance that AAU status still isn't there, but they could get an invite? Yeah, I believe that's possible.
I think you're 100% right. It nails and it parlays right into the next discussion here on research spending. One of our favorite topics over here.
Right.
Research spending. This is per NSF. That's the National Science Foundation. This is over the last 5 years, your total amount of research spending for all the Big Ten schools and including Florida State. And this kind of sums up really that AAU discussion. AAU status is really a combination of the biggest research institutions in the United States and a few in Canada. It's a research-focused organization. That is the goal of really progressing research for the AAU. And they want schools in there that have a lot of research spending, that are creating new ideas and stuff based on the philosophy of those institutions. And this graph right here shows Florida State second to last of everybody in the Big Ten, ahead of Oregon, who we all know is very low on the research spending, and also slightly behind Nebraska, who's no longer AAU. But it just shows and it illustrates that Florida State's quite a bit behind your Michigans, Washington, UCLA's, and research spending. It's not even the same hemisphere, guys. Any thoughts on that, Moan?
Yeah, Oregon is also another outlier out there, but they're in the AAU for other reasons. But yeah, I mean, this research spending, it's a big deal for the Big Ten. I mean, you look at some of these universities that we have listed there, Michigan, Washington, UCLA, Wisconsin, those guys are titans of research. So yeah, I mean, your next closest is Nebraska, and Nebraska still outspends you in spite of not being in the AAU. So they're going to have to get those research dollars up. They're going to have to make investments in research. They're going to have a plan, not for just 1 year, 2 years, 3 years into the future. They're going to need to present a 25-year plan on their research and development and where they're going from here.
I would add to that this is a holistic view, right? The Big Ten is one of two conferences that's driving all of sports in collegiate athletics. And in my opinion, it's more the intent you're willing to show that you're willing to spend to be in this different club. And that's essentially what the Big Ten is. And if they show the will, I think if everything else is equal, Florida State would get an invite. I think research is one of several things. I don't think it's the thing that's keeping them out of the Big Ten. I just think it's a nice have, not a have to, maybe a want to, sort of be a bigger part of the organization. And that's where Florida State needs to work. There's a lot of things they can work on. Research is one of many.
Absolutely. And it's a hurdle, right? Like it's not going to be the complete eliminator, but it certainly is a hurdle. And as you guys have both spoke to, they need to lift this number if they want to get in the Big Ten. Like you got to get in more with the peers. You got to get in more to that midpoint and focus on getting there in 10 to 20 years. Because you're looking at, over the last 5 years, and this is going up till 2023, that you were roughly $2 billion in research spending, and Michigan's at $9 billion. Like this is a big difference, right? Like way more than double. So it's something that Florida State needs to focus on if they really want Big Ten entry. This is one of those things that didn't get considered in the model, but actually is really important. The Big Ten's going to want to pursue. So it is a hurdle, something to consider. And the last thing here we'll talk about too, travel, and we'll call it travel and infrastructure too. Look, everybody, look at the illustration out there with the big Seminole head down in Florida, in Tallahassee. And you can notice there's no other schools right next to Florida State. Right?
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious right there. So if Florida State would be entered into the Big Ten without a traveling partner, obviously this would be travel logistic nightmares, especially for a school like Washington and Oregon. You're cross country. Look at that. You're literally going cross country in the U.S. and everything. So travel is a huge concern, unless perhaps you brought in multiple teams from the South. And that's a completely different discussion. But if you're only adding Florida State, it's logistical difficulty. Also, everything that comes with that, too, the mental health of the travel toll of student athletes. That's something we're learning more about. That's something recently that UCLA has spoken to. That could be a concern for Florida State. If you're traveling a ton of miles every single game, everywhere and stuff, there are ancillary issues that come with the logistics part of the travel. And I'm curious to get your guys' take on this. Moan, what do you think about logistics and travel for the Noles?
Listen, I don't think you can leave them out on an island. Same thing was said about USC and UCLA, and they added Oregon and Washington. You're going to have to bring partners along, I think. One of the big hurdles facing Florida State is the infrastructure in the city of Tallahassee. The airport is a little bit outdated. It is difficult to get in and out of. We've heard ACC coaches complain about travel to Florida State between the time of landing their plane and actually getting to campus. They only have, I believe, 2 runways that operate there. So you got a lot of time waiting to get taxied onto the runway and take off. That's a headache for the Big Ten that they don't want. Some of these rural schools like Penn State, they have their own airport. For Florida State, I don't think that's a possibility simply based on where they're at. So they're going to have to improve that municipal airport. I know they have started making some improvements on it. But again, I think the Big Ten wants to see, hey, 25 years from now, what's the infrastructure going to look like around Tallahassee?
Mm-hmm.
It's another consideration, but again, like with the AAU, I don't think it's the reason they're not in the Big Ten. I think we have bigger concerns. It makes it more difficult to travel if they're on an island. Bringing along a travel partner, I think, makes sense. But I just don't think the Big Ten has a need to bring in Florida State today. And to me, these other things, the AAU and other things that we have talked about those in the past, I don't think that that's the main reason they're not in the Big Ten. I think, and we'll sum it up here at the end, but I think it's another thing that maybe they can look at and say, this is a complication, but we can work on it. Maybe we add to the airfields there in Tallahassee, but I just don't think that's the main driver why they're not in.
Yeah, and you're looking at all these holistically, right? Like the ACC grant of rights. We already talked about that. That is suffocating over
Yeah.
$500 million to outlay to get in, to even get yourself away from the ACC for
Right.
consideration, right? Then the research aspect, the AU and the travel, logistics, it all kind of melts together. And then there's lastly, what you're alluding to, Nate, too, is like the valuation of Florida State. Florida State, are they valuable enough to lift the payouts of the Big Ten Conference if they
Right.
happen to get in? That's a completely different discussion. In
Yeah.
my point of view, based on their history, based on the models I put last year and stuff, based on viewership, I would argue they're at least flat, maybe lifts the Big Ten too. But that certainly could be another aspect of consideration that needs to go into this whole puzzle. But let's talk now and let's go into the lens here of what Florida State can do. If you're a Knoll fan out there and stuff, what the heck do you need to do to get into the Big Ten one day? We're not saying it's going to happen tomorrow. It could happen in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. We don't know. But there's an action plan here based on these hurdles that we've talked about. And the number one item here that I'm going to speak to is simply win.
Yeah.
Especially in football. If you lose in football and you start losing your brand value, then that's going to be a disqualifier, guys. Florida State must win in football to keep up their brand, to lift their brand in the future. You've got to make it happen if you want to be competitive, to try to get into the Big Ten or even the SEC one day. You have to win in football, maybe even focus on basketball, but mostly football since it drives 75% of realignment. And number two, I think you can speak to this one really well, Nate, actually, the patience of really the time frame here for Florida State.
Yeah, I mean, there was an urgency when they first filed the lawsuit. We followed that urgency, and we thought they maybe just be able to force themselves in the door. And it didn't work out that way. And there's several reasons that didn't happen. We've talked about them. But at the end of the day, Florida State just wasn't an immediate fit for the Big Ten. There is no urgency to pick up another school in the Big Ten or the SEC for that matter. Nobody can prove to me or give me the answer to the question of why now, right? So if you aren't going to be in right now, then play the long game. Say, yeah, we will go in 2030, 31. If they let 6 years go by and they're willing to be patient and wait, then they're going to be in their driver's seat. But I also think there's lawsuits that are still out there. I know a lot of people have been saying they're going to be settled or whatever, but I still find that hard to believe. They invested as much money as they did. They're just going to walk away. So I think if they play the long game, maybe they win the lawsuit and they get out earlier. But that patience will really pay off. It's just not going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. Moan, speak to developer relationships.
Yeah, this is the important thing. I think you've got to reach out to Big Ten universities, start to develop a rapport with them, start to build partnerships with them. Again, like I said, Florida State's just been outside their, sphere of influence in the Big Ten. They're just kind of hanging out down in Florida and SEC country. They've got to reach out. You've got to be the first one to reach out and say, hey, let's work on something together. Hey, we've got this we want to work on with you. They've really got to improve their relationships with the members of the Big Ten, because ultimately those are the members that you've got to win over to get their vote to get into the Big Ten. Because remember, it's not athletic directors that determine who gets in the Big Ten. It's the presidents and chancellors.
Right.
Those are the people you have to win over.
Absolutely. And then the last point here, the action plan for you Knowles fans out there: increase your research spending. Also try to weasel your way in, get into the AAU. I know that Florida State's actually looking at that and stuff. That might just happen and everything, but increase the research spending, focus on research. Like Moan mentioned, to develop those relationships to get you into the AAU, make that happen. That could be a huge swing factor too. And that is your 4-point action plan, guys. Win, be patient, develop relationships, and increase research spending. All right, final thoughts here. Moan, what are your final thoughts on Florida State in the Big Ten?
I agree. Win is key. Number one. You can't have another season like you did last year. That's going to bring your valuation down. That's going to take the number one thing you have driving you towards the Big Ten. You've got to keep up that winning. Patience, I agree with. Obviously, wait 5-6 years. It gets cheaper. And then like you said, you got to develop relationships, increase research funding. You got to start. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now.
Yeah.
So they've got to start right now and get this figured out so they can see where they're going to be in 2031, 2036, 2040, 2045.
And I would just add on top of that the marshalness of the board of trustees, or is it board of governors for Florida State, raging against the machine that is the ACC. You're going to have to come up with a way to either live with them or continue to be on the outs and fight for your rights in court. But either way, you need to settle down and maybe drop a little of the meanness in the conversation. Lawsuits are already there. That damage is done. But I don't think the Big Ten is going to want to bring in schools that cause trouble. I don't think that they want to add that to their list of things to be concerned about. So either settle in and just prepare for that 5 or 6 years jump, which I think all three of us agree they'd be much better fit at that point for. Or the other thing you could do is just continue to stay separate from the ACC and say, we're going to do whatever we can to feed ourselves. And that means maybe we take some different decisions as we move forward.
Fantastic points. These are not all data relevant points. We do a lot of data analysis on Wild University episodes, but this one's more nuanced, guys. There's more to this discussion than just the numbers we're learning about. Fantastic points all around. Now let's jump to the conclusion. So Florida State to the Big Ten. Right now, it's a long shot. The grant of rights is a huge hurdle. The academic fit isn't perfect, and the travel would be, frankly, brutal. Those are the facts, but is it impossible? No way. In college football, money always seems to get creative and find a way. While a move for the Seminoles in the immediate future seems remote, over the next 5 to 7 years, anything is possible. But what do you think? Can the Seminoles pull it off, or will they remain in the ACC? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Will Florida State find their way out? And don't forget to subscribe for the latest realignment news. Class is dismissed.